I married one man. Until his twin and the panties confused my heart. For 15 years, I believed marriage meant sacrifice, that loving someone meant slowly erasing yourself until nothing remained. My husband's indifference became my daily reality, his coldness my normal. I stopped recognizing the woman in the mirror, stopped believing I deserved to feel desired or valued or even seen. Then I met someone who looked at me like I mattered, who reminded me that desire isn't selfish, and that choosing yourself isn't betrayal, it's survival. This is a story about awakening after years of emotional death, about rediscovering passion you thought was gone forever, and about learning that sometimes the most honest thing you can do is admit your marriage died long ago. If this story helps you understand that feeling alive isn't a luxury, it's a necessity, please like and subscribe. There are marriages that die loudly through affairs and arguments, and then there are marriages that die quietly through accumulated years of emotional absence, through one partner slowly disappearing while the other doesn't notice or doesn't care enough to try to bring them back. For 15 years, I lived in a marriage that was killing me by inches, married to a man who treated me with polite indifference, who saw me as household fixture rather than as woman with needs and desires of her own, who had stopped touching me, or wanting me, or even really seeing me so long ago that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be desired by anyone. I'd convinced myself that this emotional deadness was just what long-term marriage looked like, that passion and connection were things that faded naturally over time, that I should be grateful for stability and financial security even if I felt like I was slowly suffocating. And then I met someone who looked at me with genuine interest and desire, who made me feel beautiful and valued and alive in ways I hadn't felt in over a decade, and I had to make impossible choice between staying in dead marriage out of duty and obligation, or choosing myself and the possibility of feeling truly alive for whatever time I had left. My name is Isabel Santos, and I'm 41 years old. I'd been married to my husband Graham for 15 years when I met the man who would catalyze the complete transformation of my life. A transformation that felt like waking up after years of sleepwalking through existence I'd stopped questioning. Graham was 45, worked as an insurance underwriter, made solid upper-middle-class income that provided comfortable lifestyle. I'd worked as an office manager for a medical practice before our marriage, had enjoyed my career, but Graham had convinced me to quit after we married, arguing that managing our household and supporting his career would be better use of my time than continuing to work when we didn't urgently need my income. The pattern of our marriage had been established early and had remained essentially unchanged for 15 years. Graham worked long hours, came home expecting dinner on the table and the house maintained to his standards, spent his evenings and weekends focused on his hobbies and interests while I orbited around him managing domestic logistics that made his life comfortable and convenient. We'd stopped having meaningful conversations years ago. Our interactions consisted almost entirely of practical exchanges about schedules and tasks, surface pleasantries that maintained appearance of functional relationship, while actual emotional connection had died completely. Our physical relationship had been essentially dead for the last 8 years. We'd have sex maybe 3 or 4 times a year, encounters that Graham would initiate out of some sense of biological necessity, but that felt mechanical and disconnected. That left me feeling more lonely than if we'd had no physical contact at all. Graham never touched me affectionately outside of these rare sexual encounters, never kissed me with any passion, never looked at my body with desire or appreciation. I'd learned not to initiate intimacy because rejection was worse than absence, had convinced myself that maybe physical connection just wasn't that important in long-term marriages, that what Graham and I had, stability, financial security, functional partnership, was enough even if it felt emotionally dead. What I didn't recognize until much later was how completely I'd disappeared during those 15 years, how thoroughly I'd erased my own needs and desires in service of maintaining marriage that was sustaining only Graham while slowly killing me. I'd stopped dressing in ways that made me feel attractive because Graham never noticed or commented on my appearance. I'd stopped pursuing hobbies and interests that brought me joy because they took time away from managing Graham's household and supporting his activities. I'd stopped having opinions or preferences about anything because Graham either dismissed them or made decisions unilaterally regardless of my input. The woman I'd been at 26, vibrant, confident, full of energy and curiosity about life, had disappeared completely, replaced by a hollow person who existed only to facilitate someone else's comfortable existence. The encounter that would change everything happened at a coffee shop I'd started frequenting in the mornings after Graham left for work. Going to this coffee shop had become one of my few acts of minor rebellion. Using an hour to sit somewhere that wasn't my house, drinking expensive coffee I bought for myself rather than making it at home, reading books or just watching people rather than immediately starting my domestic tasks. It was small escape from the suffocating routines of my marriage, brief window where I could remember I was person rather than just function in someone else's life. I'd noticed the man several times over a few weeks. He'd come in around the same time I did, would order his coffee and sit working on his laptop, occasionally would smile at me when our eyes met across the shop. He was attractive in an understated way, probably mid-40s, fit without being overly muscular, dressed casually but well, had kind eyes and warm smile that made him approachable rather than intimidating. But I'd never spoken to him beyond polite nods, had maintained the careful distance married woman should maintain from attractive strangers, even when her marriage was emotionally dead. One morning in early October, the coffee shop was unusually crowded, and all the tables were occupied. The man approached my table and asked politely if he could sit in the empty chair since there was nowhere else available. I agreed, and we sat in initially awkward silence, both focused on our respective activities, me reading my book, him working on his laptop. But eventually he closed his laptop and asked what I was reading, and we started talking in that easy way that sometimes happens with strangers when there's unexpected chemistry and connection. His name was David. He was 43, worked as an architect, was divorced for about 5 years after a 20-year marriage that had ended amicably when both he and his wife recognized they'd grown into incompatible people who were staying together out of habit rather than genuine desire to be partners. He asked about me, about my life, with genuine interest that felt startling after years of Graham's polite indifference. I found myself being more honest than I'd intended, admitting I was married but not particularly happily, describing the emotional emptiness of my relationship with Graham without initially meaning to reveal so much to a stranger. "That sounds incredibly lonely," David said when I'd finished describing my marriage in vague terms. "Being married to someone who doesn't really see you, who treats you as functional support rather than as actual person with needs and desires, that's a terrible way to live. You deserve so much better than that." The directness of his assessment was startling and validating simultaneously. Here was a stranger who could recognize in one conversation what I'd been experiencing for 15 years, but hadn't allowed myself to name clearly. I was lonely. I was unseen. I deserved better. We talked for over 2 hours that morning, conversation ranging from our respective relationships, to our interests, to our perspectives on what made life meaningful and worth living. David was funny and thoughtful and genuinely engaged with what I was saying in ways Graham hadn't been in years, made me feel interesting and valuable and worthy of attention. When we finally had to leave, both of us having other obligations, David asked if I'd like to meet again sometime, maybe for lunch or dinner, continuing conversation that had been surprisingly meaningful for both of us. I hesitated, knowing that agreeing to meet a man who wasn't my husband for lunch or dinner crossed lines that married women weren't supposed to cross. But something in me desperately wanted to say yes, wanted more of feeling seen and valued and interesting rather than invisible. "I'm married," I said, needing to be clear about my situation even though I'd already mentioned it. "But I'd really like to meet you again, just as friends having conversation, nothing inappropriate." The disclaimer felt necessary even though both of us probably recognized it was somewhat artificial given the chemistry and connection that had developed during our conversation. David and I started meeting regularly, once or twice a week at coffee shops or restaurants. Conversations that ranged over everything: and that made me feel more alive and engaged than I'd felt in years of marriage to Graham. We talked about our lives, our experiences, our perspectives on relationships and meaning, and what we wanted from our remaining years. David was respectful of my marriage boundaries, never pressuring me for physical intimacy, never explicitly suggesting I should leave Graham, just consistently being present and engaged and making me feel valued in ways my husband hadn't made me feel in over a decade. But the emotional connection between David and me was undeniable. And as weeks turned into months, I had to confront that I was developing feelings that went beyond friendship, that I was attracted to him in ways that felt like betrayal of my marriage, even though nothing physical had happened between us. The contrast between how David made me feel, seen, valued, desired, alive, and how Graham made me feel, invisible, irrelevant, tolerated rather than wanted, became increasingly impossible to ignore. About 3 months after meeting David, we were having dinner at a restaurant when something shifted between us. We'd been talking about desire and passion, and whether people in their 40s could still experience the kind of intense attraction they'd felt in their 20s, and David said something that changed everything. "I think about you constantly, Isabel. I know you're married and I've tried to respect those boundaries, but I can't pretend anymore that what I feel for you is just friendship. I'm attracted to you, not just physically, though you're beautiful, but to who you are as person, to your intelligence and your humor and your perspective on things. I want you in ways that go far beyond what's appropriate for friendship. And I think you feel something similar, even if you haven't let yourself acknowledge it because you're trying to be faithful to marriage that's already dead." His honesty forced me to confront what I'd been avoiding. I was attracted to David, wanted him in ways I hadn't wanted Graham in years, was developing feelings that had already crossed into emotional territory that was betraying my marriage, even if I hadn't crossed physical boundaries yet. "I do feel something," I admitted, my voice shaking. "I'm attracted to you. I think about you all the time. I look forward to seeing you in ways I haven't looked forward to seeing my own husband in years. But I'm married, David. I made vows. I can't just act on these feelings without destroying my marriage and my sense of my own integrity." "Your marriage is already destroyed," David said gently. "Not because of me, not because of what we feel for each other, but because you've been living in emotional isolation for years with someone who doesn't value you or desire you or even really see you as person. Staying in that marriage isn't integrity, it's just fear of change, fear of uncertainty, fear of admitting that the life you've built isn't actually the life you want to keep living. You deserve to feel desired and valued and alive, Isabel. You deserve to experience passion and connection rather than just existing in comfortable numbness. And I want to be the person who makes you feel those things, if you'll let me." That night, I went home to Graham and our empty marriage with David's words echoing in my mind. I looked at Graham sitting in his usual chair watching television, barely acknowledging my presence when I came in, going through his evening routine without any interest in me or in connecting with me, and I understood that David was right. My marriage was already dead. Staying in it wasn't about integrity or honoring vows. It was about fear of change, about accepting comfortable emotional death rather than risking the scary possibility of actually feeling alive again. I told Graham the next day that I wanted a divorce. His reaction was surprise and mild irritation, rather than any genuine emotional response. He hadn't realized I was unhappy, couldn't understand why I was suddenly dissatisfied with marriage that from his perspective had been functioning adequately, seemed more concerned about practical logistics of separation than about losing me as person he cared about. His response confirmed what I already knew. Graham didn't actually want me or need me emotionally, had been content with marriage where I performed domestic services while he lived his life essentially as if he were single. Leaving him would disrupt his comfortable routines, but wouldn't actually cause him emotional pain because he'd never been emotionally invested in me in first place. The divorce process took 11 months to finalize. Graham contested it minimally, more out of inconvenience than because he actually wanted to save our marriage. eventually agreeing to relatively standard settlement that divided our modest assets equitably. During the separation, David and I continued our relationship, which transitioned from emotional affair into actual physical relationship once I'd moved out and filed divorce papers. Being with David physically was revelation. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be desired, to have someone touch me with genuine passion and appreciation rather than perfunctory obligation, to experience sex as mutual pleasure and connection rather than as task to be completed. But beyond the physical attraction was something even more meaningful. David consistently made me feel valuable and interesting and worthy of investment in ways Graham had never made me feel even in early days of our relationship. He listened when I talked, asked questions that showed genuine interest in my thoughts and experiences, made time for me not out of obligation, but because he genuinely wanted to be with me. The contrast between being with David and being married to Graham was so stark, it was almost painful to recognize how much I'd been settling for, how many years I'd wasted in marriage that was slowly killing me, while I convinced myself that emotional deadness was just what long-term partnerships looked like. 2 years after meeting David at that coffee shop, after my divorce from Graham finalized, and I'd been in serious relationship with David for over 18 months, I'm 43 and living life that feels genuinely mine rather than lived in service of someone else's comfort. David and I live together now, have built partnership that's based on mutual desire and genuine emotional connection rather than on performing roles or meeting obligations. We cook together, travel together, spend time together because we actually enjoy each other's company rather than because we're contractually bound to cohabitate. What I learned from 15 years of dead marriage to Graham and from the relationship with David that awakened me is that desire isn't luxury or selfish indulgence. It's fundamental human need, and living without it, living in relationship where you're never desired or wanted or even really seen, is form of emotional death that's unsustainable long-term. Graham hadn't been overtly cruel or abusive. He'd just been indifferent, had treated me as functional fixture rather than as woman worthy of desire and attention and genuine engagement. That indifference had slowly killed the vibrant, confident woman I'd been, had convinced me that I didn't deserve to feel wanted or valued or alive. Meeting David reminded me that I was still capable of feeling passionate connection, still capable of being desired and valued by someone, still deserving of relationship where both partners actually wanted to be together, rather than just tolerating each other's presence. Choosing to leave my marriage to Graham and pursue relationship with David wasn't about betraying vows. It was about refusing to continue betraying myself, about recognizing that staying in dead marriage out of duty or fear wasn't actually honorable, but was instead slow form of self-destruction. Some people will judge my choices, will say I should have tried harder to save my marriage, or that developing feelings for David while still married to Graham was unforgivable betrayal. But I know the truth. My marriage to Graham was already dead long before I met David. Graham had killed it through 15 years of indifference and emotional absence, through treating me as convenient domestic servant, rather than as woman worthy of desire and partnership. David didn't destroy my marriage. He just helped me recognize that what I was living in wasn't actually marriage at all, but rather slow emotional death. I'd been too afraid to escape from until someone showed me what being truly alive could feel like. My name is Isabel Santos. I spent 15 years in marriage that was slowly killing me, married to a man who treated me with polite indifference, while I convinced myself that emotional deadness was just what long-term relationships looked like. Meeting David awakened feelings I'd thought were gone forever, reminded me that desire and passion and genuine connection were still possible, forced me to choose between staying in comfortable death or risking everything to feel actually alive. I chose life. I chose desire. I chose myself and the possibility of relationship where both people actually wanted to be together. And while that choice meant ending my marriage and disappointing people who thought I should have tried harder to save something that was already dead, it also meant reclaiming the woman I'd been before 15 years of neglect had convinced her she wasn't worthy of being desired or valued or seen. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is admit your marriage died long ago, And the bravest thing you can do is choose to feel alive again while you still can. Thank you for reading. If this story helps you understand that feeling alive isn't a luxury, it's a necessity, please like and subscribe.